The microphone. Hi, everybody. Welcome to all of you. I can see the numbers on the list are still growing, almost 100. I think it's a real pleasure. It's a real honor also to have so many of you. I think many of you are as versed into the topic as some of us who will be presenting, giving keynote. So it's as much an exchange and as a learning opportunity, or it's more learning the way we want to see it. I think what is really interesting is that doing research differently, I think is a key topic for the TPP as a network of members in general, because I think doing science differently, transdisciplinarity, it's a way of better responding to farmers, to societal demands. There is a clearer link, at least maybe a higher probability of achieving change and impact. And we know this has not always been something easy in the community of researchers, the academic community, about how to go from knowledge generated to change and impact that is relevant to stakeholders, to the society. And it's also something that is interesting because it requires humility on behalf of the research community, which cannot expect to have all the knowledge and all the answers. And it has met, as I said, a number of challenges in the past in generating what I call actionable knowledge and contributing to change. So I think the topic is very important for us and for agroecology specifically. As we know, it's a systemic set of principles, it's a systemic object, it's an approach. There are all these dimensions in agroecology, and it requires maybe not looking at agroecology the way researchers traditionally look at its objects or its topics. And we also remember that the roots of agroecology are as much to be found in social movements, in farmers' innovation and farmer research, in farmer practices and civil society, as much as, or maybe even more than in academic research itself. So doing research differently also has a strong historical justification. So just to finish this very short introduction, we are going to talk about transdisciplinarity, but there's a number of related concepts, frameworks, systemic approaches is very much related to it. Action research, which some people might say is very similar in many dimensions to transdisciplinarity, the way Michael is going to talk to us about it. Innovation processes and systems. So all these things, probably depending on who you are and where you are, you might use some of these words rather than others, but we will see there are many synergies between them. With that, I leave the introduction as co-convener of the TPP. And I would like to introduce to you Michael Hauser, who is going to give us the keynote. I think, Michael, you are visible on screen. You are a system scientist, associate professor at BOKU University in Austria. You are also senior associate at the World Agroforestry, ICRAF. I think you are currently based, if I'm not wrong, in Nairobi. You are also a research affiliate with the Abdul Latif Jamil Water and Food System Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge. I think you have a natural social science background. You have studied agroecology. You have worked on farm, food system production, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe. And I think you study, the way I read, and you study the complexity of change at play when people restore nature, social organization, and livelihoods. So, Michael, the floor is yours, and we are very eager to listen to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard, and a warm welcome to all of you. I'm actually calling in from Kenya, but from a remote rural place, and my internet, for some of you, maybe shaky here and there, so I could switch off my camera at one point. Let me go straight into screen sharing mode. Bernard, if you could confirm that you can see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, perfect. Right, well, transdisciplinary research, that's what I was asked to talk about. And in writing this presentation, Bernard and Fabio and colleagues have realized how challenging it actually is, and that many on this call would have been in a much better position to talk about it, regardless of the fact that I'm teaching it at the university. I think what probably led us to this presentation is the work we did with CIFOR-ICRAF, the review on transdisciplinary approaches in agroecology, and what we can learn for those in terms of capacity. And I won't talk about that, but more of my meta level understanding of transdisciplinarity. Nothing is hammered in granite here. It's really an input into our conversation. I'll take less than 15 minutes for that. And I would like to say and acknowledge Lynette Eboso, who is on the call here, with whom I did work on this piece of research that I've just mentioned. Now, transdisciplinary research, in my perspective, isn't a new thing. And Bernard, you have hinted on it already. I mean, there's literature on it. There's the innovation systems literature, but before that, there's the farmer first literature, started by Chambers and colleagues. Beyond farmer first revisited. There's action research. There's participatory plant development as a specific method, just to pick out one example. So transdisciplinarity isn't new, and it shouldn't be new in agroecology, given its three pillars: science, and practice, and the movement. Nevertheless, I think it's important to talk about it, and I would like to put forward three arguments. The first argument really is that the solutions to the complexity of problems really require transdisciplinarity, and that wouldn't surprise us. But the second argument then makes a point regarding its definition and assessment. I'm proposing that we define it holistically and then also make headway regarding understanding it, and that could lead us towards measurement. So I'll talk about the framework here. And number three, in order to get transdisciplinarity into our minds and hearts and organizations, no matter whether we are a research organization, a university, a farm organization, a cooperative, or an NGO, we need behavior change, and I'll have a slide on that one too. But let's go straight into the first argument, and that's really where I take a step back and make reference to Ross Ashby, a psychiatrist and a system thinker, and someone who became famous for cybernetics. He wrote a lot about systems already 50 years ago. Now, translating his insights into our world would mean what you see on the screen. Solutions must match the complexity of the system. And this is actually a simple proposition. Depending on how we define complexity, here I define it by actors and interconnectedness. Others here in the room would define it by scale, maybe the dynamic nature of systems, the adaptiveness of those. But here I define it as interconnectedness and diversity of actors. And my argument here is that the more diverse the actors landscape and the more interconnected the parts, the more we are up here in this upper quadrant. High complexity, compounding dynamics, and that's where actually transdisciplinarity found its home. Now, if you take Steve Kliessmann's levels of transition that many of us know about, the lowest level of transition is really transactional, substitution. We change, we embrace quick fixes. The degree of transdisciplinary in that lower left quadrant may be rather less. That's not to say that it's not needed, but it may vary in the research process. There may be consultations at the beginning, depending on who runs the research. Then the implementation is done by researchers, and then there will be tests going on. But the further we go up from the left lower quadrant to the upper higher quadrant, the more we increase complexity. the more we go into food systems and the transformations we want to see, the more important transdisciplinarity becomes, because there are no simple solutions for those. It's not one body of knowledge, one epistemology that would actually help craft solutions, but it's a collective effort. And the real world lab that come out of the sustainability research domain now become more important in agroecology as well, are one prominent example. And I call this the transition complexity relation because the higher we move up in the transition ladder of Steve Glissman, the more transformative we become, the more complex things get, the bigger demand for transdisciplinarity. I'll put this forward. Please contradict me afterwards in a discussion. It's up for debate. Now, how much do we actually see in the literature on transdisciplinary research? And I've done a quick review, just looked at one platform, Science Direct. There are others. The trend lines may look differently. Here on that X, you see the publication counts, and I started off counting from 2000 to 2023. I left out 2024. And you can see, well, agroecology is actually doing pretty well. There's been kind of a constant growth, but then a takeoff in the year 2008-9 to over 1,000 publications a year. So that's just for publications that mention the term agroecology. And again, I didn't look at all those papers, so it's just a publication count, yeah, that use the term, nothing more. It's no content analysis at this stage. Now, transdisciplinary research is second. Similar takeoff around year, well, a bit later actually, 2014-15, but also going upwards, but slightly less. Now, I was wondering, whether these terms connect. So I looked at transdisciplinary research and agroecology. Played around with the terms a bit, but what it seems that the two concepts rarely appear together in publications that are published under Science Direct. As I said earlier, there may be other platforms where these trend lines look differently. But to me, this is quite an interesting. It's not an insight, but an observation I'm making, because we could argue, well, the transdisciplinarity already is part of agroecology. It's encoded in the principle number 8 out of the 13 principles on agroecology. So why talk about it? But you could also argue for a need to do research differently, to bring more transdisciplinarity in this upper curve, the rise of agroecology in the literature. And this, I believe, starts off with the definition. And what we first need to do is really define transdisciplinary research under the context or in the context of agroecology holistically, and then also assess it holistically. For those who have seen the earlier slides, I've flipped definition to assessment, because at the end we want to understand, how much transdisciplinarity actually is in our partnership, is in our work. And a very good starting point eventually is the HLBE definition, the High Level Panel of Expert definition 2019, that says transdisciplinarity goes beyond disciplinary confines, right? So it's not multidisciplinarity, it is not interdisciplinarity, but it's also bringing on board other forms of knowledge. I think that's an important component of the way we should define transdisciplinarity. It aims for transformative results to tackle real-world issues, and it comes up with a new methodological framing. It's not just sequencing methods to help us generate insights, collect data, convert this into information, and generate knowledge, but it is a new form of collaborative effort between those different knowledge systems and that requires a new methodology. So that's it. That's a starting point that I would like to put forward here. The HLPE definition of transdisciplinary, slightly adapted. I took this from our report. But if I operationalize this this definition, I would look at five central aspects. I would look at knowledge, how knowledge is being integrated. I would look at the type of collaboration, then the degree to which problems are being, real world problems are being addressed, and who actually defines what is a real world problem, innovation and impact. So let's look at those 5 dimensions, I call them characteristics briefly. So integration of knowledge basically looks at the degree to which various disciplines and knowledge systems are effectively collaborating, working together in agroecology research. And that means acknowledging and actively working with different theoretical perspectives, epistemologies, and also ways of reasoning, ways of knowing. So that's number 1, integration of knowledge. Number 2, collaboration. I mean, we all talk about collaboration and partnership, but it's the depth and breadth of collaboration that actually matters throughout the research cycle. It may change at some point throughout the cycle, but getting a hand on whether we are in a consultative mode, basically asking questions. Some say this is already a partnership, or whether it is the problem definition that's being developed jointly. There's a big difference between the two. Yeah, Robert Chambers used to ask, whose knowledge counts? Yeah, so it falls into that one too, that the collaboration. Then problem-solving orientation. Are we doing research just for the sake of gaining insights, or are we tackling real-world challenges where solutions are practical enough and applicable? And that, to me, that goes beyond confirmative research. There's so much research where we actually know what the likely outcome is, and I think often we are tackling with research actually an information dissemination challenge, or a power asymmetry regarding access to what is already known. Number 4, innovation. I think transdisciplinary research should focus on innovation at methodological level, and that means actually going beyond the traditional norms of traditional disciplines, and again, bringing a lot of insights from the innovation systems literature on board. And number 5 is impact. It's if agroecology research in agroecology that works with the movement, that works with the practitioners, doesn't produce tangible impact through all the 4 other characteristics, I think we'd have to kind of revisit our investment and prioritization priorities or standards. So putting everything together into one framework, could help us developing for each of the characteristics indicators, and then engage those for a reality check to really understand when we do research in partnership, when we have our projects, what is actually in it. So we could look at the diversity of knowledge contributions, at the different stages of the research. We can, in collaboration, at the actors' diversity and the quality of interactions, and also the power balances amongst actors. Who actually decides what the problem is, what methods we're going to use? And are there ways to reconcile conflicts? And finally, I'm just jumping down to 5, impact. Does the research really have transformative potential? And what makes us believe that this is the case? And then we can start rating those. There are various ways of doing this. This is work in progress, and I would love to get your response and feedback on this. But it's a framework for checking whether the reality in our minds regarding transdisciplinarity is also the one that matches with the indicators we look at. That takes me to the 3rd argument. bringing transdisciplinarity into our minds, hearts, and organizations requires a new behavior or new behaviors. And that's probably the most difficult one. I argue we need at least three things: interest, capacity, and capability. And if I would ask you, what's the most important one, or where do also donors invest most in it? My response would be capacity. There's a lot of capacity building or capacity development around, and that would be the most spontaneous reaction to what's most important out of the three. But if I think a little bit deeper, I would say it's actually interest. I think that's where it starts. You don't hire for skills, right? If you're working in HR, you hire for attitudes. So attitude is part of that interest landscape that comes with human values, the core beliefs of people, basically ways of seeing the world. I think that's, we must change the way we see the world, and that's closely linked to changing the way we define interests, and refine our core values in this regard, because core values are almost like our operating system when it comes to behavior. Second, capacity. Yes, there need to be resources, there need to be time. Engagement is time intensive. I still remember 25 years ago when I worked still in a PRA, participatory rule, operational mode, participatory learning and action. People told me, Michael, it takes too much time, too much of our time. We can do that quicker and faster. Yeah. So we need to allocate resources. All parties need to do that. The farm organization, the consumers, the researchers, people working in the policy space. The engagement processes are resource intensive. For this, we need capacity. And the third one is capability. This is where the skills and the ability to maneuver, to navigate the transdisciplinary research processes come into the picture. I believe it needs all three and probably a few more in order to get transdisciplinarity in our organizations. The way I define it here, the most important one, I think, is interest. If there's no interest or no authentic, plausible association or attachment with transdisciplinarity, even capacity and capability won't help us. And for doing so, and for conducting actually research differently in that transdisciplinary spirit, we need to transform ourselves. And that starts with a broad societal conversation about the type of research we want to put forward and how to do research differently. That also requires a commitment to fail, to fall, stand up again, keep walking, try something different. And with that, Bernard and Fabio, I think, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. It's super interesting. I think I'm going to hand it over to Bridget, who will now facilitate a panel discussion in reaction to your presentation. So, Bridget, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fabio, for handing over to me. And thank you, Michael, for a most inspiring presentation. And also for sharing the framework ahead of the workshop for all of us to have a look at. In working through it and in listening to your presentation, it's raised three things for me, and they really are interrelated. The first thing is that I think it's really important for us to reflect on our own work. I look at how many projects we perceive to be certainly multidisciplinary, but the extent to which researchers from different sectors are actually collaborating and actually co-creating knowledge, and the extent to which they're actually drawing on each other's knowledge is often questionable. And then that made me think that actually it starts right at the beginning of proposal writing. And maybe we need to be asking the question of to what extent are we really developing proposals in a transdisciplinary way? And then I thought that maybe one of the main problems with why we have a lack of real collaboration is that, or what underpins real collaboration is respect, a respect for each other's views, for our needs, our interests. And then I thought, well, if we're talking about respect, then it's not just about, for example, natural scientists and social scientists respecting each other, but it's also clearly a need to respect the needs of other stakeholders. So, for example, if there's private sector or companies that are involved as one of the stakeholder groups, what do they need for them to remain involved? And what about farmers? What are their needs? They're interested in impacting on their livelihoods and their land, basically. And maybe the other aspects are less important to them. And that brought me back to the work that myself, as part of Prolinova, and members, we're a network that promotes local innovation, and we promote participatory approaches, in particular farmer-led joint experimentation or innovation. And I thought to myself that most of those characteristics of the framework for transdisciplinarity have a direct alignment with what we try to get out of participatory innovation development or joint farmer-led experimentation. Because, we start off, we want to integrate different forms of knowledge, including farmer knowledge, and we want to collaborate in a meaningful way, and we want to solve real-life problems. And certainly we want to look at innovation. We want to look at ways of co-developing new or better ways of doing things. And lastly, we obviously want to have impact, and we want to see application of things that are developed through these co-creation processes. So, what I realized is that this framework that's been developed has application at many different research, within many different research contexts. And I think that that's very interesting and very valuable. And with that, I'd like to move across to our panelists and give them an opportunity to share their views on transdisciplinarity within the agroecology sector and on transdisciplinarity in particular. So I'd like to start. I've got a number of questions which I'd like to pose. The first one I'd like to pose to Francisco and to Lillian. Francisco is, now I'm going to be tested. Francisco is from Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo. My effort there. And Lillian, you from University of Hohenheim. So I wanted to pose a question to both of you. I mean, we've had this presentation and we've heard about this way of reflecting on or assessing transdisciplinarity. I'd like to ask the question, how do you find this framework differs from earlier or current thinking on transdisciplinarity? Thank you.
You want to go first, Lillian, please?
All right. Hello, everyone. I really celebrate that so many people are here and this high interest in agroecology and transdisciplinarity. And to your question, I think this framework is novel, and the strength of this framework is really that it goes beyond a normative definition, and I think also goes beyond the discourse of a shift of paradigms, but it really elaborates on these different characteristics and dimensions of transdisciplinary approaches, and that makes it possible to analyze and reflect on the own work in this perspective that there's a range of implementation and ways of implementing transdisciplinary research, and it's really important to communicate about the quality of it and of these different characteristics it involves, and there's many different aspects. So to improve this transdisciplinary quality, and yeah, I think this is really nice to have this differentiated elaboration on the different dimensions of what involves transdisciplinary approaches.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Michael, for sharing your presentation in a very well organized and thoughtful way. Here are my first reactions. First, you couldn't avoid to connect co-creation with transdisciplinary. They have to come in a natural way. You started mentioning at least 3 principles to guide this process of transdisciplinarity. And my take on it is that the use of the concept of transdisciplinary research is a way for scientists to understand what we, other group of scientists, call it an intercultural process of co-creation. What basically you are saying in your presentation is that transdisciplinary reaches the highest level when you have different ways of learning and creating knowledge. And for having different ways of creating for learning and creating knowledge, you have to throw in the factor of culture necessarily. And when we get into that field of culture, then things get a little bit more complicated. And because the definition of culture is so broad that we can get lost. When we talk about co-creation, only the word co-creation of knowledge, we do co-creation when any of us published a paper with 2 or more authors, regardless whether these authors are from the same field of research, are from this specific field of research. It's co-creation. But that's not the type of co-creation that you are talking about in transdisciplinary way, or what we talk about in intercultural co-creation of knowledge. We have to reach beyond that. And that implies learning different, first, number one, assuming, understanding, and accepting that there are different ways of creating knowledge. One way I say this is that if you see a picture of conventional agriculture, for instance, there is a lot of research behind that picture. Research on soil, research on pests, research on whatever, you name it. And when you see a picture of a traditional farm system, a traditional agroecosystem, without any use of the conventional inputs, there is also knowledge behind that picture. But that knowledge doesn't come necessarily from the scientific method, comes from a different way of creating that knowledge. So when we talk about transdisciplinary research, I assume that it is basically the same as saying intercultural co-creation of knowledge, in which different ways of learning, creating, innovating, and transmitting knowledge come together in a safe environment to create something new. That is one way to say transdisciplinarity. Another way to say it is that when we talk about biochemistry, for instance, the science of biochemistry and other sciences emerge in the process of combining different fields of science, creating something new. But this creation comes from the same paradigm, same way of thinking, same background, same science. What we're talking about here goes beyond that because it puts cultures together. It puts different ways of learning together. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, I think one very important aspect you mentioned is the innovation part in the ways of doing science, in the scientific methodology, and I think that's really interlinked to everything what inclines a transdisciplinary approach. Is we need different methods to integrate different kinds of knowledge, different knowledge systems. And that implies also a learning process. So I think that framework is really useful to guide through this learning process to do science differently by elaborating it more, differentiated what it means, and also to introduce kind of a transition process, because of course we also need a scientific transformation process when we want to go from business as usual, doing science with business as usual, to this doing science transdisciplinary and integrating these different knowledge systems. So that is not like we don't go from the state how it is now, how business as usual is, to a vision, maybe like it is described in the definition of transdisciplinary research, but we go through this transformation process, and I think it's really nice to have this tool to reflect on ourselves and to understand how we can improve it more and more, to implement it in very complex realities where we also need to go through learning processes.
Thank you, Lillian. Thanks to Francisco and Lillian for your thoughts on this. I'm going to go across to our other two panelists, Jane from Ignite and Lauren from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. Right, thank you. Easier when I can see you both. Thanks so much. Just wanted to get an idea, given the potential benefits of carrying out a diagnosis using this framework or an assessment using this framework, in what instances do you envision this framework being useful within your own context and the type of work that you're involved with? Thank you, and either of you can take the floor.
Lauren, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go? Okay, well, I was excited, really. Michael, thank you for your presentation and the prior comments. And the program that I run is called the Global Collaboration for Resilient Food Systems. And it used to be called, some of you may know, the Collaborative Crop Research Program. So we've been funding research as a means to support food security, food sovereignty, biodiversity preservation, etc., in 3 regions of the world, in the high Andes, West Africa, and East and Southern Africa since the 80s. And the trajectory of this program has been very similar to some of the trajectories you'll see around transdisciplinarity, which starts from an interdisciplinary perspective that we can solve, or a disciplinary perspective that we can solve this problem, to the realization that we have to cross disciplines, to the realization that we need to participate with others that are deeply engaged in the issues that the research is around, to ultimately ending in transdisciplinarity. And so for me, when I saw the framework, I really appreciated it. It's aligned with a lot of the thinking that we've been developing over these decades. And in 2013, I think we really started trying to Prolanova as an inspiration, but how do we really center farmers as key actors and leaders in the research process? So we started building on the decades of this trajectory to advance an idea of farmer research networks, where now we've been able to support over 38 farmer research networks that range from 15 to 2,000 farmers engaged with scientists, with NGO extension and other stakeholders, really truly in a transdisciplinarity, approach. We haven't used that word, but that's what it is. And so we developed principles to guide our work back in 2013. And so when I saw the framework, I thought, this is really helpful. It's a great rubric for us to be able to, as a touchstone, to be able to kind of check our work. And we've done similar kind of assessments of our work, and we've learned some things about it, right? And so, for example, in applying this framework, which I think most easily resonates with the research community, from a formal university, scientific research center, maybe NGO folks also, but not saying that farmer groups, other stakeholders can't do it. Just the language is set up in a way that it's a certain kind of paradigm. So maybe we need other versions of this, other descriptors. I would also say that, so in applying it, which I'm excited to do, there are things I would tweak. And the other piece of this is who is actually deciding how you're going to answer these questions, who's at the table, what are the processes, what are the relationships you have with people that you're answering this with. I mean, it gets very complex quickly. And I think it's all, you know, we've all been engaged in participatory research probably for the most part, and we know how to address some of those things, but I think we have to tend to that. And then just the last thing I would say is, I think part of this that's so critical are mindsets, and that was mentioned before, and it's the third point, Michael, that you have. And I think that a little more of that could be reflected in the framework. But, you know, maybe it's something we could all continue to workshop together. I know today is going to address it too. So I'll pass it over to Lauren.
Great, thanks, Jane, and thanks, Bridget. Michael, that was a wonderful presentation, and I think the framework is really strong and useful, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that we'll have together about it. So I think there are quite these questions, Jane, that you also elevated. You know, how do we work collectively? How do we forge insights together, the insights that we need? What does inciting action look like through participatory research and through transdisciplinarity? There are, of course, some of the same questions that Jane had that I would echo. You know, who is defining the research problem? And then what are the limitations of our conventional scientific methods? So I think within this framework, we do need to talk about how our institutions, our research institutions and other institutions, funding institutions, need to change so that we can move toward transdisciplinarity. Michael, you started your presentation by talking about by saying that that solutions must match the complexity of the system, and I was responding to that by saying the answer to complexity is diversity. Francisco, you mentioned this as well. We need different ways, people with different ways of experiencing the world around the table. We need different ways of thinking. We need the ways that different languages help us experience the world, the way people live in different places, help us interpret both problems and solutions. So how do we really articulate that in the framework? And I think you've done that in this, like through the indicators that you've and the kind of questions that you're asking, and how do we pull out some of these cross-cutting themes a little bit more clearly? When I was thinking about how this would be applied, I was thinking about kind of three pieces of work. One is the politics of knowledge I can put that we led at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, which was really lovely, transdisciplinary, not maybe as we could have gone farther, but a very, very transdisciplinary experience. And Francisco, you're extending that experience by developing an intercultural methodology, which I'm really excited about. So that could add to this conversation. Also, a piece of work led by a colleague, Maria Bustamante, who has taken systems thinking and complexity science to understand how we can strengthen food systems frameworks. And I think that work, Michael, can also inform the framework that you've used and inform this kind of broader project that we're all engaged in, this conversation that we're engaged in around transdisciplinarity. And thank you, TPP, for sparking this off. And then the third is really, you know, a lens through which I'm increasingly trying to see the world and see this work, which is around living in indigenous sovereignty and, you know, thinking about decolonization. And I think that though some of the themes there you've touched on, Michael, really nicely, but they could be also drawn out. And I'll just mention a couple of them. Are, you know, around how we decolonize methodologies, how we change the way that we see the world. And Michael, you're referring to this really, I think, in your interest principle. You know, how do we bring ourselves to this work? How do we acknowledge the power and history power relationships, power dynamics, and the kind of history that we're living. That's about kind of telling the truth in transdisciplinary research and action. It's about learning differently, and it's about also acknowledging the land. It's about practicing humility and listening. Bernard, you said this at the beginning of your introductory remarks about taking responsibility, about willing to take risks and to engage in direct action. So I just wanted to think from these two dimensions. One is how transdisciplinarity can help us reshape our institutions so that we can truly be transdisciplinary, and how we can, how this framework can also help us decolonize methodologies so we can recognize more clearly power and historical dynamics and legacies as we approach research.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks so much to the panelists. I think we're going to close it there because we've taken up our time slot. But wanted to say thanks very much for very inspiring discussion. Thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Fabio.
Thank you very much, Bridget, and thanks to all the panelists for these really insightful comments. This workshop is really eye-opening, I would say, at least for me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly share my screen, and I'll put up a the replies that I gathered. So as you might remember, when you registered for this workshop, there were a number of questions that were pitched to you. And I'm going to go through the analysis that we've done of those questions. There were 4 questions. We had more than 550 respondents, so it's more than 2,200 opinions. I'll go really quick. We're not going to go one by one, of course, just to give an idea of what are the expectations and the thinking that has gone into this before. So the first question was, what are your expectations on this dialogue? And you can see there's learning about transdisciplinarity, co-creation of knowledge, networking, learning about implementation opportunities, how can research have policy impact, the inclusivity of the approaches, what is the societal impact, learning about challenges, and discussing solutions, tools. The second question was, what is the most important element, in your opinion, of transdisciplinary science? And we have here collaboration and integration of diverse disciplines, as we've heard already, systems thinking to embrace complexity. This has been mentioned quite a bit. Inclusivity and respect for all forms of knowledge. I really like this idea of respect. It's a word that doesn't come often in our work, I would say. It is, of course, inherent to our work, but I rarely hear it openly, overtly. Practical application, sustainability of practices, communication and dialogue to achieve common goals, equity and fairness for wider benefits, and continuous learning, openness to new ideas and perspectives. The third and fourth questions got a lot of diverse opinions, and I'll try to summarize them really quickly. So the third question was, what are some of the critical gaps in the agroecological research? So you can see here, it ranges from lack of integration of traditional and indigenous knowledge, lack of actually putting to practice holistic approaches and system thinking in the research methodologies, lack of robust methodologies based on data deficiencies, lack of policies that support agroecological transitions, concerns about scalability and how different socioeconomic conditions and policy environments affect the agroecological practices. Of course, incentives, fundings, institutional support for training and implementation. And you can see it goes on, lack of education on what are participatory methods, gender mainstreaming, lack of gender mainstreaming, and community engagement. Also, interesting remark on what is agroecology's role in climate change mitigation, how this could be better explained, better exploited, better integration of modern technology. Often agroecology is seen as quite sort of not not modern. Improving communication between researchers, policymakers, and farmers. This is something that is a recurring theme in many of the discussions that the agroecology TPP faces. Gaps between related economic models, market analysis, and so forth. And then the last question was, what are, in your opinion, are some of the critical gaps in implementing ecological practices? So you can see here, I grouped them a bit: financial constraints, policy and institutional support. I'm going to go real quickly here. It gets even more complicated. Some are overlapping with the previous ones and the gaps in research. Market access and input availability, technology transfer and knowledge dissemination. And here, final slide, interdisciplinary collaboration, holistic approaches, resistance to change and cultural barriers, and long-term sustainability and scalability. So we have all the raw data, and we're going to analyze them further. But this is just to give you a glimpse of what you people have put into this workshop already. So I really appreciate your contributions here. Now, before I hand it back over, I do want to bring you to another poll, very quick poll. So if you could join me on this, you need to scan this QR code on a mobile phone or a mobile device, or Daria is going to put in the chat the link, and you can go there. It's just 2 questions really quickly on what you've heard on the keynote presentation and on the discussions from the panelists. So the first question is, what are to you the most important elements of the keynote presentation? So now you've heard the keynote presentation, you have received the background framework prior to this workshop. So maybe it has changed your mind, the presentation. There's elements that you had not considered before. You can put more than one reply if you want. Okay, so I see the assessment framework. I think that framework, I have a feeling it's going to be really important. Okay, innovation. Okay, I see clearly transdisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, co-creation of knowledge, system thinking, humbleness, not there. I really like that. That's Michael, take note. We should be more humble. Collaboration, motivation, challenges. Yes. Okay. I'm going to give it another minute, and then I'll pass over to the next question. Okay, I see people are still typing. Okay. You're engaged. Good. Mindset change. I like that. Community-centered. Power dynamics. Power dynamics, yes, they've been addressed. They've been addressed in the comments of our panelists. I think also how we design research is so important in defining these power dynamics. Who takes part? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so 10 seconds and we move to the next question. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, one participant typing and I'm moving. Okay. So having heard the panel discussion, what is your advice for improving the analysis that were presented to you today on transdisciplinary science? And you will have time to develop on this during the breakouts. But just so as we're a collective body right now, okay, in-depth decolonizing methodology. Oh, I kept this anonymous, huh? So you can say whatever you want. As participants are typing, I do want to remember that all the material in this workshop will be shared with all the registrants, including these results from the polling and, as I said, the results from the framing survey. And of course, a lot of thinking will be put into these inputs as Michael Hauser and his team will be revising and fine-tuning the framework and related work. Okay, we're getting a lot of things here. So let farmers judge. Okay, practical examples, more practical examples, develop proper methodologies, does not go beyond science. Where are the borders? Okay, defining borders of science, being pragmatic, considering traditional knowledge, trade-offs, and time, financial constraints, I would say. Roles of various types of disciplines and various non-research stakeholder groups, capacity building, acknowledge creative power of unknowing. Okay, that's interesting. Creativity, apply the framework within different research levels, develop appropriate skills, integrating food sovereignty, knowledge sharing, integrating science and indigestion knowledge, indigenous knowledge, yes. Be clear on who decides, power dynamics clearly, integrate, not isolate, provide more practical results. Do not use only slogans. Okay. Applications, impacts, favor collective learning. Okay. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think there's quite some meat here. And so, wow, thanks for all these inputs. Okay. I'll keep the question up, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can keep on looking and typing your ideas here. So now what we are going to do is we're going to move to projects. We have lined up 4 presentations from projects where we will hear from our scientists and practitioners some best case examples of transdisciplinary science or doing science differently, elements of this difference and transdisciplinarity. So let's kick off with our co-convener, lovely Bernard.
Lovely,
Bernard.
but I like it.
You feel free to share your screen and the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Over.
Hi again, everybody. Sorry, it's me again. I'm presenting this on behalf of what I would call the Agroecology Initiative team, which is a number of colleagues from research and also our partners wherever we are working in different countries. I'm going to share some experiences. I'm not sure it's the best experiences. It's just a way of illustrating how we try to work. So, am I in full screen? No one? No.
Not yet. Now, yes.
So, very quickly, for those of you who might not know what the Agroecology Initiative in a nutshell, so its objective, develop and scale agroecological innovation with small-scale farmers and something important, other agricultural and food system actors across different socio-ecological contexts. We work in 8 or even more highly diverse contexts in Tunisia, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Kenya, Zimbabwe, India, both in Madhya Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh, Laos, Peru. It's the research team are mostly CG centers. The Alliance, IMI, World Fish, CIFOR-ICRAF, I'm sure I'm going to forget many people. CIRAD, and obviously our national and local partners who might or might not be researchers. Actually, a number, I think the majority of them are not researchers. And it started to be implementing not even 2.5 years ago, and it's going to finish in this first phase by the end of the year. So I don't want you to necessarily understand the diagram on the right, but it's basically there is a living landscape, which is a way, some people call them living labs. It's a space for multi-stakeholder collaboration. You could maybe call it transdisciplinary collaboration around agroecological transition. And around this core device for collaboration, there is transdisciplinary sorry for the font size, transdisciplinary co-creation of innovation to test and assess the benefits of agroecology. There is business models with a focus on agroecological business models, the idea of institutional arrangements, especially policy and policy instruments, the idea of assessment and holistic assessment, and the idea of influencing understanding, mostly to the first phase, but influencing behavioral change There is also a small component about gender and youth and social inclusion. So you can see it's a fairly, if I may abuse the word, it's a fairly transdisciplinary approach to agroecological transition. How we try to do research differently in this initiative. So I think one of the first things is these partnerships that we use it in this agroecological living landscape. Landscape being not necessarily well defined, depending on where we work. It can be related to a value chain, it can be related to a watershed, it can be related to a small region, it can be also related to a territory where farmer organizations operate. So it's not necessarily continuous. And when we say it is our main focus of work, it doesn't mean that we work exclusively at this living landscape. There is obviously plots, there is farms, there is national level, there are all kinds of scales that we address in interaction with this living landscape. Another thing we try to do is to start not by saying we have to do a transition, we try to formulate a collective, a shared vision about what is a desirable future for the stakeholder of the landscape that we work, a desirable future, and what is the place of agroecology in this desirable future, because as you know, many stakeholders have interest and objectives and desire that go way beyond agroecology. We then, once we have this vision formulated, which requires some specific tools, we try to go into identifying transition pathways. So how do we get to this desirable future? We try to identify behavior changes that may be needed to get to this future, and we try to develop work plans where we can work together. We develop what we call a vision to action kind of process. Another thing we try to do is co-designing, and mostly we work on co-designing technical innovation, but it can apply also to business models or to policy, with a component about identifying existing local innovation. I'm not sure, Lisa, if you're going to talk about it, but it seems that Prolinova has obviously worked a lot on agreeing on priority issue in technology between farmers organization, technicians, and researchers from the research team. Co-designing protocols, designing then monitoring, evaluation, and learning system around these trials. And the last one we try to do is holistic assessment of the performance of agroecology, with at the same time a generic framework, but also trying to have a locally adapted framework to take into account the diversity of context. So I think this is how we try to do research differently. I'm not going to enter into the details of how we try to sequence this process, starting from mapping of stakeholder, engaging with stakeholders, developing vision, co-designing innovation, and right now we are in this early assessment, early because 3 years or 2.5 is very short term for a process of transition that might last more than a decade. So we know we are into a beginning of a process. Just a few images you can see from Andhra Pradesh, you can see from Kenya on the right, from Tunisia, from Senegal on the bottom right. So it means there are field activities, there are training, there are workshops, there are all kinds of different ways we can make this transdisciplinary, this action research, this collaboration work in different settings. And obviously the settings will depend on the specific activities and also which stakeholders participate, because not all stakeholders are necessarily in every setting or every activity. Just an example of work they did in Kenya that Lisa again was coordinating, just to show that when we say we work on testing innovations or innovative practices, when you look at what people are already doing that can be related to agroecology, in a broad sense, you have already a lot of things happening. So it's not necessary that we enter new ground for many farmers or farming systems. It's something that I think most of us we know it is the case. Just to tell you, this is an idea of how many different things we did in different countries with different types of on-farm experiment, different types of protocols, and this training or capacity building that was a key component of everything we do in co-design mode. And we put here training of farmers, but others as well, which is technicians and the researchers themselves. And here I'm not going to enter into detail on the type of technologies we have been working on, which covered quite a lot of diversity, including things that are not directly crops, like crop livestock, water terraces, wetland management, solar pumping, depending obviously on the specific context and the negotiation that took place between the farmers, the community authorities or the community stakeholders, sometimes the private sector, about what makes sense, which is what is the demand, that we can work together to try to find enough new knowledge or enough new innovation that will help answer the challenge or the desire of the people that are involved in this collaboration. Few reflections to I would say to finalize it, and I have barely started presenting. The idea that agroecology or contributing to agroecology transition require deploying and inventing systemic approaches that favor dialogue and co-design at various scales. I put in red because I think really it's something that is very important. I think, Michael, you already said we need innovative methods. So I think we have found this. Context specificity and adaptation key to success. It's not that we're looking for the tool that will work everywhere or for the solution that will work everywhere. It's really important. Not only the context, but the trajectory within the context, which is people have gone already through different things. For example, it's interesting now in many places to see that people look at agroecology saying going back to our roots, whereas for other contexts, it's really actually something that is not necessarily part of their culture, or at least it's a culture that is not present anymore. The idea that are we process-based or are we output-based in our research? I think that is something that is very important, and we could discuss about it. The willingness, Michael, you called it interest. I think this is something we have seen, and I think it is very important in the agroecology initiative. We are a group of people. CG people, as you know, are not necessarily the most known for their interest in action research, transdisciplinarity, but there is a team that is quite willing. The idea beyond the researchers, the individual, the emergence or the consolidation of a new culture for researcher and organization. So the word culture, Francisco, you use it, but it can also be applied to organization, to our own community of researchers. The idea that there is a huge need, a huge dimension about individual, but also collective learning, sharing. I added the word education because I think it's not just capacity building education that can start early on and can take different forms depending on the type of participant. The idea of negotiation and adaptation constantly going on. The goals, the objective, the object, the pace, the sharing of funding, which is something researchers don't like to discuss. They like to be controlled. The credits that are given, not only through authorship, the values, the attitudes, who takes part in this negotiation, what kind of power dynamics, because we talk about transdisciplinarity, but not all disciplines or not all stakeholders have the same, I would say, power to influence or to contribute to whatever is being done collectively. And last, the idea of developing and actually using an adaptive MER, which is monitoring, evaluation, and learning approach and process to be able to periodically assess and assess critically, not just claim success, but assess critically what we do and adjust the way we work together and we achieve change. Oh, sorry, that's something I had already said about the credits, but I put it again, the shared ownership of knowledge, of results, of success, of the process. And I think researchers, we have not been necessarily very good at letting enough space for others or letting others claim credit first and us coming as backstoppers. I think I'm done. So you have the website of the initiative if you want to see more, and obviously you can write to me if you want to enter into some kind of dialogue. Thank you very much for your patience with this presentation.
Thank you very much, Bernard. So let me now pass the floor to Marie Delattre-Gasquet. She's a researcher at CIRAD, and she will be presenting for the Foresight program. Marie, do you wish to present yourself? Share your slides? Yeah, okay, the floor is yours.
Can you see my slides now?
Yes, very well, thanks.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. So I will present a project that is being done by CIRAD and FAO and funded by GIZ, which is on the foresight for the transformation of agri-food system through agroecology. And it had two components, a global stock-taking component on what do the foresight exercises that have been done in the past, what can we learn from them? And then there were 2 participatory foresight exercises, one in India and one in Senegal. Basically, the background is the following. The question is, can policymakers make real transformative decisions if they are presented the usual options? And our answer is no. Policymakers cannot make transformative decisions if they are always presented the same options. And what do we see for the moment about what is the way it is thinking about the future? It is mostly modeling that is shown, and the models kind of it depends on what you put in and what then you influences very highly what you come out, and therefore there should be really more different types of doing things. Foresight is really is different from pure modeling. Foresight is really to anticipate and invent several futures. It is not only anticipating one future, it is anticipating and inventing, really creating the future you want. Bernard talked about desirable future. That's what foresight does, but I would say desirable futures with an S, because there are several ones. And it is also assessing how they will be in the long term, not in the next 5 years, but in the next 20 years. So foresight is really interdisciplinary by nature. It requires people from different disciplines. So it requires researchers from different disciplines, but also working with farmers, working with policymakers, working with people from the agro industry. So it also goes beyond pure research. It goes also to the whole participants of the agri-food system. It is collaborative and participatory, and I will show you how we've done it. It has a problem-solving orientation. It is trying to innovate, and it looks at impact and application. And I will really explain a bit more how we did it in the 2 components, the global review and the Andhra Pradesh in India and Senegal. First of all, what have been the process of our project? So for the global guidance process, we were asked to look at a corpus of foresight exercises, and we found 16 of them who had agroecology scenarios in them, and we analyzed them in a very thorough and rigorous way. In order to try we debate the results, we have a lot of workshops and presentation of the results, and got to the final document. And we tried to bring together agroecology and foresight community. And that the objective was to get to a global guidance process on how to do foresight for the transformation of the food system through agroecology. So now we have finished this global guidance document on how to do foresight in the future. And I will show you a few lessons that we've drawn from that. Then the second component of the project is work being done in Andhra Pradesh and Senegal, where a model was designed and really built with the farmers, and in order to see how agriculture, what it would be 25 years from now. So the models were used not to say it will be like this, but they were used as what we call learning machines. That means it is all the participants in the foresight processes, the farmers, the policymakers, people from the agro industries, they build together the scenarios by with a lot of debate, and then there was modeling work to test the plausibility and consistency of the desired future. So it was really a learning machine. It was not to say it will be like this, but it will probably be like this if you take these hypotheses, and by testing the hypothesis, people really learned a lot. So stakeholders were really intellectually and emotionally involved. And what did we learn also from the global foresight? So we had we looked at the 16 foresight exercises that have agroecology in it, which is not a lot when you look at all the foresight exercises that are taking place. A lot of them do not have scenarios with agroecology. And even there, we were a bit wide because we didn't stay strictly with agroecology, but we took sustainable intensification. I mean, our definition was rather wide. What we learned is that there was not that many of them, and there should be many. Most of the foresight processes are done from the north, with institutions from the north. And really, we believe and recommend that more institutions from the south should be involved in foresight with agroecology. That a lot of the foresight on the future of agriculture look with agroecology. They pay too much attention to, when they look at food security, they put a lot of attention to availability and not necessarily to stability or access. It really looks at availability. There's not enough attention to the whole agri-food system. What we looked at, they consider very often production. So that would be level 1, 2, and 3 of Gleason's definitions of agroecology, and they don't look at all at the whole processing, retaining, consuming, storing, disposing part of the system. No, so they don't look at the whole agri-food system. And they often also forget about what happens to farmers, employment, emissions, pathogen, water use. And some of them do take that into account, but not enough. Also, there's not enough attention to scale, to interactions between territorial scale, national scale, regional and global scales. They look at innovation. Sometimes they consider innovation will be very rapid, but also there are inertia, and these inertia are not always taken into account. And what we also found that there's a need for more articulation between qualitative and quantitative methods about looking at the futures. So really important recommendations that for foresight, that all 5 levels of agroecology should be included. And really, it's the whole agri-food system that must be looked upon, taking into account storing, processing, retaining, etc. And that you can have also, and people often forget that you can have several scenarios with agroecology, and that it is important to have powerful and imaginative representation of the future, and really narratives that really appeal to people, because people live with stories and not only with figures. And if you want people to go to a transition to agroecology, you really have to bring stories that will appeal to them. Figures are not sufficient. From the work that was done at the global, but also at the national level, at least in India and in Senegal, we saw that when you go through look at the future with an agro-industrial lens, which is most of the business as usual models, what goes into is about enlarging farm sizes, and because it will drive profit into industrial agriculture. With an agroecological lens and another model, which in that case was agribiome, you see that enlarging farm size cannot be a driver in most developing countries because of population growth, land constraints, etc. You also see that with the agro-industrial lens, you tend to go towards a world without agricultural or farmers, with an agroecology lens and another model, but the model have to adapt. You cannot use the classical model to think about the future of agroecology. You need special models that take different types of, more types of crops, interaction between crops and livestock, and use of water, and the classical models do not do that. And also it shows that there are, with the agroecology lengths, there are these highly diversified systems, as you know. So developing new models show that there's a need for new metrics. And that's very important for the people working in agroecology. We cannot develop foresight or models with the current metrics. We need new metrics, and therefore we need new and more and better quality data that are really needed for these models. And there's also a need for really ethics of participation and deliberation, because when you have big groups of farmers, policymakers, everybody has to listen to each other and really support and react to other people. And some people cannot take the power over other ones. So last, I would say that really this project, there's a big integration of disciplines. There's a big level of collaboration in the project also at national level, at global level. And what we see in the project that have been studied, that it is a lot of collaboration in some projects. They basically have a problem-solving orientation. Innovation is very good. And as far as impact and application, it shows that the future with conventional industrial system is not desirable, but it also showed that the future with agroecology is desirable, but not without tensions, not without difficulties. All problems will not be solved through agroecology. And it is important to show that the work we've done shows that, and it is important to keep that in mind and not to try to sell something, a future that is really lovely and without difficulties. Thank you very much, and I'm at your disposal afterwards for any questions.
Thank you very much, Marie. So this was a very interesting presentation. I'm now going to pass the floor to Valentina Robiglio, Senior Land Use System Scientist at CIFOR-ICRAF, who will be talking to us about Agro4. Valentina, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the framework that actually came very timely, because it's helping us on an ex post assessment of what we have done in the project Agro4, and I found it very, very, very relevant. What I'm going to present are like the first emerging insights from the use of this framework that is similar to things we were already thinking at. So Agro4 is a project that focuses on what we call a wicked problem, that is the problem of tropical deforestation, smallholder and commodity-driven tropical deforestation at forest frontiers, in this case in Peru. And for being deforestation a very complex, an outcome of a series of interconnected dynamics, social, ecological, economical, what we need are really interdisciplinary approaches. And so Agro4 is a project that, together with a sister project called Para, has been active between 2019 and 2023. And focus on agroforestry concession. Agroforestry concession is a legal mechanism that was developed by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Forest Service in Peru, that basically grants a land title for 30 years to formalize the access to land and trees of farmers who have settled on forest land, so that who are not eligible for a proper title. We had estimated that there are 120,000 beneficiary households who manage about 1.5 million hectares of forest landscape mosaic, so it's quite relevant for Peru. And the two projects together focused on enabling socio-technical and institutional conditions for agroforestry concession to be attractive for farmers and successful in engaging them, engaging communities, but also in engaging authorities to achieve land restoration, deforestation, and social inclusion outcomes. So how did the project work? There were basically three components. The first component is where most of the research took place, and where 3 regional landscape pilots that were different watersheds in 3 Amazonian region to cover the heterogeneity of farmers, of livelihoods, and also of authority capacities of land use system. And in these 3 pilots, we set up a system of integrated research that looked at practices and land use system, including the agricultural and the silvicultural component, looked at household capacities, capabilities, aspirations, and also looked at how tenure and regulation and rights influence decision. And the research conducted at this level informed the 2 other components, but this process all these processes were in parallel. So research was concomitant to engagement with institutions and also with the activities that relate to the sustainability component. So, So focusing on research, so the key outputs of research were a menu of agroforestry option and agroforestry practices that include practices related to different land use system and also at the farm and at the landscape level. And then local models of delivery, the technical, delivering these approaches to the implementation of practices. And so looking at models of rural advisory services and ways to generate and co-generate knowledge with farmers. We also focused on developing agroforestry knowledge platforms and communities of practices. And now we are the reflection is leading us to think of a new framework to look at this system at the forest farm interface that basically centers on agroecology as a leverage for forest stewardship, really through an integrated way to look at land use system in this type of landscape. So in terms of the technical institutional component, what we did was really informing what we were doing in the pilot and really connecting institution, connecting authorities to the processes on the ground to improve regulation, generate public funding guidelines, generate farm registries that fit with the data management system of the local authorities, that fits with their monitoring and zoning. And also we inform all the policies that related to climate change and that focus on smallholder land use system. And for the sustainability component, we engaged through the consortium with actors that focus on green public incentives, on rural advisory services, on value chain and zero deforestation. And that came basically by the design of the project. So in terms of actors and disciplinary integration, we had a course research and expert team with different disciplines, land use system, PS economy, livelihoods economists, rural specialists on rural advisory system, and all the different, let's say, discipline that really focus and land on the local community and let us understand local context and local system. Then there were a group of technical experts, basically lawyers, foresters, policy and public finance experts, topographers, and communication specialists, local experts, advisors to regional government, technical assistant and extensionists, forester and lawyer, gender specialists, who were part of the team as the technical expert, but not of the research team in the sense of research. And then we had the actors we engage with that we call strategic case actors and stakeholders that are functionaries of the national forest authorities, of the different units of the forest authorities, and also of authorities of the regional level and of the different ministry, including the Ministry of Environment. And the local case actors who are farmers, communities, the local functionaries, local foresters, and members of technical agricultural roundtables, NGOs, organizations, and civil societies. And in the sequencing of the work, so the project was really developed based on a preliminary study on smallholder and inclusion and opportunities for that. That was realized in 2015. So based on that, we, who are the core scientist group, engaged both with the expert and with the policymakers and with the communities to analyze the problem. And then we, when we designed the research, we worked with the expert and we consulted the communities and the policies and the government authorities. And then in the research implementation phase, as you can see, there were many more connections with the research core team, co-producing knowledge with the farmers and with the local experts, and consulting the policy, the authorities, and with connection that also were independent from us, that started to be built because of the process. So in terms of the preliminary reflection and validation of results that we had at the end of the project last year, again, it was us who basically connected through the different actors and to the different actors and facilitated the process of reflection. Whereas now that we are in the institutionalization phase, so the project is ended and we become marginal, there are the other actors who are connected and develop the knowledge and the processes to give sustainability and institutionalize project results. So in terms of the conclusion, how to embed research into action, because I think this is really what the project tried to do. It is very important to do this concept of starting with a problem-solving orientation, because that can really connect and engage the different stakeholders to generate impact and innovation. It's important with this focus to work on a multi-level and nested structure. That is really what allowed us to capture the interplay within components at the same level, but also across levels, not only the governance one, but also, of course, the governance part is key. It's important to develop a project structure that allows for continuous co-learning through effective communication interaction. So the most interesting, or I think the key steps and the key phases in our project when we managed to go to the field together with authorities of different sectors. There were the farmers, the communities, the NGOs, and also this transdisciplinary team that we had in the field with specialists of rights, agronomists, foresters, engagement people, technicians, and extensionists. So there is really the need to invest and engage on knowledge, and that's a big lesson learned. You need resources to develop all these components that basically are the matrix of this type of projects. It's important to, and I think this is a challenge, really to manage to fully integrate knowledge system and value system, and also to frame and manage trade-offs, because trade-offs emerge at the horizontal level and across the different components of the system, and it's very difficult to navigate them. It's super key, the behavior, the attitude of the researchers and of the team for continuous negotiation of concepts across teams, so within the research unit and with stakeholders. And that's really related to the personal and to the organizational culture. And it can be super frustrating because it takes a lot of time and it's a lot of back and forth, and it's not linear as a process. So that requires capacity for adaptive management and flexibility, and also requires a kind of implementation theory. And that's very important. How do we sequence things, and how are we able to really implement things in an adaptive way, but at the same time respecting the sequencing? Very simple things. Planting season. If you, because of the research that takes more time, you are not able to take results, and you are not able to test your innovation because you miss the planting season, and it's very difficult to really manage all these things together. And we need adequate impact assessment frameworks and metrics, qualitative, quantitative, across levels and on these different components. And we need time, because it's time for the research, but also for system level change. There is this inertia that also other colleagues mentioned, and this non-linearity of these processes that probably needs that we find ways to embed research into programs rather than into projects. And I think that's my last slide.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Very interesting presentation. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Lisa Fuchs, who was, ciao Valentina, now I see you, was the former Agroecology TPP coordinator and now has moved on to greater things. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I am very happy to speak after this incredible lineup, I think. It's been really interesting. So I was invited to speak about experiences from ABCD. And specifically, I will look at how structured co-design engagement processes allow mobilizing assets and agency for efficient, equitable, and sustainable outcomes. I hope that my slides are moving. I'm in a place where internet is not great. I think I will cut my camera. And now nothing is moving.
Do you want me to pull up your slides?
Let me try. Okay, I think it's coming now that I cut the camera.
It's coming. Yeah, it's coming. Yeah,
okay, so I'll be speaking about asset-based community-driven development, or ABCD. As most of you might not know, ABCD actually has been around for quite a while and was initially conceptualized by two professors in the US, Jody Kretzmann and John McKnight, who worked together in the 1980s together with a number of associates on understanding how to improve inner city dynamics in the US. In 1993, they published a seminal book that is called Building Communities from the Inside Out. Since they began speaking about ABCD and developing methods and approaches, the global network of people who are participating on engaging in ABCD has really grown. And today we're finding ourselves with a huge community of practice that includes various different stakeholders, including an ABCD Institute that is based in Chicago and the Cody Institute that is based in Eastern Canada, for example. ABCD does a lot of different things, but fundamentally it introduces a change in perspective. You can have a look at the graph on the right-hand side, and I'll be sharing the slides as well as everybody else so we can have a better look at them. But fundamentally, ABCD really looks at moving from external assessments to appreciative self-realization, from deliverables to discoverables, that is a specific term that we use, and fundamentally from top-down service driven modalities to locally driven community-wide social political solutions. At ICRAF, I have been leading an ABCD team. So as Fabio just said, I used to be at ICRAF. I was at ICRAF for 10 years. I recently moved to the Alliance, but at ICRAF, I was implementing several ABCD projects. And in these different projects, we did a lot of different things. So as I said, I was invited to speak about ABCD, but I'll just mention a few things so that you can have a look, that you see the kinds of things that we were doing. And I included numerous references at the end of the slides. And as I said, I'll be sharing my slides. So in this research and development approach that we've been implementing over 10 years at ICRAF, sorry, the scientific lens, if you will, that we applied has really been different according to what we had been working on. So initially, we really looked at what ABCD is and how it can be done in the context of what we are working in. So international agricultural research and development setting. We developed both highly structured and integrated approaches, such as what you're seeing here on the screen, but we also developed much more distilled versions of how ABCD can be operationalized in our context. We also looked a lot at what it does in terms of the effects on livelihoods, on climate change adaptation, mitigation, etc. And more recently, we looked at various different things that you can have a look at. And we more recently also started looking at the specificities of how it operates, what the implications are in terms of doing science differently. So to really understand what the intrinsic contributions are when taking these very decisive and explicit engagement approaches, how it influences attitudinal changes, and how it can potentially contribute to behavioral changes. So as I said, I recently moved to the Alliance, and now we mobilize this knowledge in the context of several bilateral projects, one of which is the VIPPT project, the Vegetable Integrated Push-Pull project, that is led by ICIPE. And you can find out more about this project and others on the TPP website on GLFX. We also mobilize some of this ABCD work in the context of the Agroecology initiative. So as I said, I was invited to speak about ABCD, but as I was preparing, I thought about the fact that I would like to spend more time on the more reflexive part of this conversation. So the question of what is transdisciplinarity? And we discussed how transdisciplinarity, of course, is related to co-design, to co-creation. And it's an interesting position to present last, but I think it also helps to contextualize. So often when we think about co-design, we think about co-design in the context of on-farm innovation, on-farm experimentation, and farm-led experimentation. Bernard briefly spoke about a specific approach that we took in the Agroecology initiative in Kenya, where we had a highly structured approach to even the initial analysis, but then also in terms of how we co-designed a cycle with the participating farmers. So this is what we typically use to, and many of us are familiar with that. But is this really the only place where co-design happens? And of course we know it isn't, but very often we don't speak about this enough. We don't necessarily look enough at the other stages of a project lifecycle and beyond that are relevant and that we could be thinking about.
Hello?
Sorry, if you can mute your microphone. Okay, I'll mute.
Okay. So some of these places, and some of the presenters actually spoke about these different steps. So some of these places where co-design happens as well is, or can happen as well, should happen as well, is in the initial project design, project proposal design, the identification of participants, project and activity design, implementation, evaluation, and research. And some of the relevant questions we can ask ourselves in that context, and of course, these are absolutely not comprehensive, but I just placed them to guide our reflection a little bit, is in terms of the participants, who are we looking at? Are we looking at randomized recruitments of beneficiaries, what very often is the approach, or are we looking at purposive selection of partners? In terms of the project and activities design, do we base ourselves on needs assessments, or do we perhaps look at individual and collective self-realization in line with existing assets and agency? Or in terms of implementation, are we prescriptive or responsive? Are we project-led or partner-led? And in terms of evaluation and research, are we conducting assessments, or are we looking at learning? Do we validate or do we appreciate? So those are just a few of the questions that I wanted to raise. So drawing this more closely to this conceptual discussion that we started with, and that is the underlying fil rouge in the conversation, is really this, like the contribution that perhaps I can make building on these 10 years of ABCD to the proposed transdisciplinary research framework. And the thing that I have been speaking about for a few years now, but I think is still very relevant in our context, is that in research and development context, co-creation and co-design, transdisciplinarity have at least two sides. One of them really is this outcome focus, these outcome focused processes. So what do we do and how do we structure activities to convey ownership and agency to achieve desired outcomes? So some of you know that I'm a political scientist at the basis, and political science often looks at agency and structure. So in this specific element, Co-design and co-creation focus on the agency element of what people can change, what they can do, so that outcomes are achieved more easily or better. But the second aspect is really the structural focus, and that is the self-reflexive attitude. This is how to be a partner, how to be an ally by adopting relevant attitudes and practices as an external actor. So to me, as I said, this is like the structural focus, looking at our own selves, if you will, most of us in the setting which we're operating, critical self-awareness and reflexivity, and very often this is under-discussed, but I believe very important. This is actually my last slide, so contextualization. We started with HLPE and Fergus's work and team, of course, on what transdisciplinarity includes, and we have these 4 elements of being problem-focused, solution-oriented, inclusive, and reflexive. Then Michael and team expanded that and operationalized it by also adding some indicators and have integration of disciplines, collaboration, problem-solving orientation, innovation, impact, and application. And so as I was thinking about this, I thought it would be so nice to try and attempt to have some overlaps and a graphical representation for how these things interact, but then unfortunately I did not manage to make the time. And I thought about how my own reflections interact with that based on the experience with ABCD, but also beyond. And I recently wrote up something, and I know it's a bit long, but I wanted to contribute that just to the reflection about ethical co-design and engagement. And I'm in the process of submitting that somewhere for publication, so I can soon share this more comprehensively. But I really looked at a few things that are relevant. Number 1, passive partner selection across all skills. Number 2, it is important to embed all action in strong and continuous engagement frameworks that fosters responsive external action alongside community-driven action. To me, this is one of the core fundamental elements and one of the core learnings from ABCD. We are an important actor. We have an important contribution to make. Our contribution needs to be made in a responsive manner so that it is aligned with the interests of stakeholders with whom we are working, so that we can be an ally, we can be a partner, we can mobilize what we have access to, we can mobilize our capacities and assets in support of joint action. But we should never forget that we are not the only actors in the field. Whenever we're engaging with other partners, they do their own things. What we can do is we can help structure, we can help them structure how to be demand-driven in terms of the specific engagements that they have with various external partners, including us. The next element to me is really this question of the framing, and someone spoke about this as well. It is really important that the framing we adopt is responsive to partners' interests. If the partners with whom we are working are interested in specific matters, it's important that we understand and that we are able to speak to how what we're proposing aligns with, supports, and fosters the transformation that they're looking at achieving, rather than sticking to our universal concepts that sometimes we use and that are often way too abstract. Now, the next point that is very dear to me, that I often speak about as well, is this importance of activating the partners. Very often, many participatory approaches that exist fundamentally remain extractive, because fundamentally, they still only use people as information givers. They don't necessarily reflect with them about which place they can hold and which role they can play, if you will. And I think that this is fundamentally important, that to have a modality of engagement that allows to activate partners to self-assess, self-actualize, and self-mobilize. Because this initial attitude towards one, and Michael spoke about this in terms of what he called interest, this initial attitudinal change about people's belief in their own ability to make a positive contribution, and their belief that they, with whatever little they might have, or with however much they have, they're in a position to already affect positive changes for themselves. My next point, Bernard spoke about this quite a bit, is the importance of inbuilt, continuous, and participatory self-evaluation and adaptive management cycles. So engagement cannot be a once-off. It is not we're coming in once and we have a nice engagement framework and then it stops there and then we go home with our data. It needs to continue, and there needs to be this self-evaluation element. In line with the self-evaluation comes this co-design of the safe evaluation and other metrics. Many of us spoke about the importance of ensuring and supporting people that they get out of this engagement process with us when they're interested in learning from it. In relation to that, also super important to give back the data. We often struggle with that, but not only giving back the data in general through a nice journal publication, but in a manner that responds to and is accessible, if you will, is accessible to different stakeholders at different levels. one additional very important element to me is this regular training and capacity building of the implementing teams, especially in research and development ethics. We spoke about respect. I think like one of my observations certainly is that research ethics often are not streamlined enough, perhaps. But if we want to contribute and if we want to have a role in transformation, we need to be clear on how to do that in an ethical manner. And then my last point is really taking responsibility for how structure influences contents and outcomes. So it's our responsibility to ensure that we show up, that our science is good, that our evidence is flawless, that we know how to operate and engage with our partners. So this is actually my last slide. Let me try and switch on my camera as well. But just one thing that I was thinking about as I was listening is, I feel the TPP might be in a unique place to foster a dialogue between all of us. We are many now who have sufficient insights and have a lot of experience, a lot of practical insights also into things that are important. And I think the TPP has been doing very well to foster this dialogue today. And I think it should not stop there. And we should really find ways of how we can mobilize our different pieces of insights into this question. And those of you who know me well know that I always speak about this importance of process and sequence and decision-making modalities in collaboration. So I look forward to hopefully achieving that. And I want to leave you here with this quote that I often use. Most projects fail because you do not get the people right. If you address what is not felt, you will not succeed. Nicholas is one of our partners in the Agroecology Initiative, and it has been a pleasure to work with him and others. Thank you. As I said, I included a lot of additional material in my slides, so please feel free to have a look at the slides and get in touch in case you're interested. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome back.
I think we were forced to come back, right?
We were sucked
Yes.
into the
We were
plenary just in the middle of the sentence.
I want to hear why Sandhya is laughing. What's going on?
I'm just laughing because I was still doing this. And
This was not participatory.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I had a feeling that nobody would have ever come back. So I gave.
There is a warning. You have 1 minute left here.
Yes, yes. And everyone raised their hand at
well,
the
it was.
morning.
Anyway, we are back.
I'm sorry. We will improve this for next time.
No.
Okay, but I guess this was quite fruitful because I realized that there was a lot of discussion in all of the rooms. So I hope the rapporteurs or facilitators will manage to take some notes. Right now, the idea is that they will report back to everybody the various discussions that occurred in the separate rooms. So I would like to start with Lisa, if you agree. Your room was by far the largest room.
Okay.
So probably even one of the most
I have plenty of feedback. Look at how analog I am. Let me start. So not yet very structured, but I think we had a very interesting conversation. First of all, we were a really nice group. Thank you all for being there. I think we actually started with question number 2. What are the barriers and what are the complications? And then we looked more at, and so what are good practices, what could potentially be done? And then we looked at the TPP's potential role. But let me still, in my feedback, let me just proceed as we had it. So what can we do? What could be good practice? And I think our conversation moved beyond what was presented to what people felt was good practice. And we had very interesting conversations. As I said, I will type this up and share this. But we spent quite a bit of time talking about the role of donors in our context. And we spoke about how donors can operate to ensure that some of these things can be done. So, for example, we discussed that calls for proposals need to include a modality for transdisciplinarity, and that decision-making power in who defines the problem, what should be measured, what should be documented, etc. So that is really important to show that even the proposal development was inclusive and transdisciplinary. We discussed there could be a possibility of having a stepwise approach where there's a first round of ideas, the importance of maintaining physical meetings where different people participate to balance out power injustices, and also ensuring that the evaluation group of proposals eventually is inclusive to ensure that it's not only researchers, so that the role of different constituents is democratic. We did not use that term, but I think that's what we're looking at, that there's a fair representation, not just an biased one. Let me say it like that. We also discussed about the importance of handing over monetary power to non-research participants and projects, and that at least they have some degree of freedom over some of the budgets that they have. I'm sure we have all seen that while we charge huge overheads on projects, we expect partners to account to the cent what they have done with their money. Then a next question was also very strongly, quite strongly supported, that there need to be clear pathways to impact in the proposals, real impact. And so that needs to be real impact focused, and that this needs to be evaluated as well. So not that researchers and other project participants, but especially researchers and implementers need to be held accountable, and not only accountable by the donor, but also by the communities with which they're working, and that donors can play an important role in enforcing such accountability mechanisms. We discussed the importance of monetary compensation for participation, some of these processes, and the importance of valorizing structural valorizing of existing knowledge, including by, for example, having farmers as teachers, but not in a tokenistic manner, but in a manner that ensures that they have the capacity, that they have the methods, so that they're valorized, but not randomly thrown together. Yes, so we discussed that donors do have a role to play in terms of setting up systems that mandate specific behaviors, but that is really important, that these systems do not evolve into box ticking exercises. And I think here is where we moved also, like what aligns quite well with our contents related to question number 2. So there was quite some conversation surrounding the fact that transdisciplinarity has become the new catchphrase, that it is perceived as donor-oriented concept that is fairly unclear and difficult to operationalize for many people, and that it sits like unclearly, if you will, with inter, multi, or even a-disciplinary approaches, and that therefore it does not necessarily have a positive effect if it becomes a box-ticking exercise, such as other social considerations that are included in such a proposal and calls, as we know. We discussed also a lot about the importance of inclusion being important, of the need for being clear that inclusion needs to be structured, and that we sometimes face a situation where, because of this inclusion prerogative, people are being thrown together in a room, but there is like lacking clarity in terms of how processes and structures are being followed. Not everybody should have a say on everything, because it is important that some people have, for example, we spoke quite a bit about the importance of being scientifically sound. So to ensure that people who have the relevant disciplinary background can remain in charge of things that need technical expertise, for example. So important to do things correctly and avoid a bias, an inclusion bias that is not well structured, not well thought through. Yes, I think that is what we had here.
That's quite a lot, Lisa.
Yes, let me just perhaps say that my last point on the TPP. So we discussed a bit about how the framework can be important, and that in the context of informing how money is being spent, the framework can be very important, because it does seem that often we operate on principles, and we know very well that agroecology is about principles, and I think sometimes we are a bit shy in wanting to operationalize it, because of course agroecology is context specific, is all these different things, but then sometimes we find ourselves in a funny in-between where it's not quite clear how to operationalize things. So it might be very useful if it is adapted still with participants, and again, to ensure that it is not just a box-ticking exercise, and the TPP can play a role in supporting that, including also an ex-post evaluation of proposed approaches, so that we don't just always speak and come up with new ways of structuring, but that we also support the critical reflection and comparison of different approaches.
Yeah, very interesting. A lot of extremely valid comments, and I will require you to send me all this stuff in a digital format. No, don't send me via mail the papers. You could scan them. Yes. Okay, I'm moving on to Swati. If you could give us a report back from the discussions in your group.
Thank you so much, Fabio. And in front of juggernauts like Lisa and Bernard, I think we were the minimalistic group. I had around 11 participants, which not complaining because we were able to hear all of the participants. So all 11 of them spoke. So very interesting discussions, and the group consisted of from across the continent. So there were people from Asia, from Europe, from Africa, as well as from South America. So it was quite a diverse group. What we realized is that this humility that transdisciplinary research takes time, and we have to get to common languages and vocabularies that we use. We need to really put it out there. Second point that really came across and is that we need not forget the past. There has been a lot that has already done. Transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary is not a new phenomenon. In fact, Frank Coyes from our team, he was mentioning that multi-stakeholder innovation platforms already existed and have been around, and they have confronted the same challenges of how to do interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. How do we really learn from them? And he was also mentioning about the programs in India and Andhra Pradesh, where focus on anthropological viewpoints on different projects needs to be implemented. Then our colleague from Colombia, Marcela, was talking about we need to embrace humbleness in the groups. We need to really respect different cultures and exercise to highlight the different sources of relevance is very crucial. That kind of diversity that she was mentioning. With respect to challenges, and in fact, challenges was, as Lisa also I heard, was the focus that community is aware of agroecology, but we need to do different analysis and make it relevant for them. And one crucial point, like always, is that funding is very minimal and policy is still not place. And then corporate takeover of the industrialized agricultural systems is still persisting. How does transdisciplinary research really addresses this kind of silos problems and integrate together? Then there is need for seeds also, and then there is community requires support as well, which Monica was mentioning. Then somebody was saying that we as researchers need to come together. We need to basically have farmer-led researchers. Farmer define their research priorities. In fact, there was a very beautiful point that was made that translating development problems into research questions. How do we really achieve that in the transdisciplinary approaches? That is, and which is much practical in nature, and upscale them in the, so that it's not restricted to only civil society or a small-scale initiative. Then there is our colleague who mentioned, gave an example of sustainable food systems, and how integrating small scale pilot projects is so difficult, because it's difficult to bring systems thinking approaches in this transdisciplinary approach. There is conflict resolution, you need to have cultural differences, institutional barriers are there in in fact, I'm sure Bernard, for example, with respect to agroecology initiatives, multidisciplinary CG centers, it's difficult to work together, have common goals, and I'm sure we are finding way out of it in the transdisciplinary approach. Last point, there is more to go, by the way, but I'm wary of the time, that we need to basically link the scientists to the communities. While the community is expected to produce research papers, so how can the research communities also start taking up farming and talk about communication was also a key point as to how communication can become a source of integrating this transdisciplinary research. Fabio, back to you.
Thank you very much, Swati. Again, I will say that I look forward to receiving some notes from you, because this is really interesting stuff, really interesting. And I do want to say that some of the points that your group has talked about are really at the core of what the Agroecology TPP is trying to do. So really looking into those again and with a fresh eye is always very relevant. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it to Lillian for her report back. Lillian, the floor is yours.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes, and it's very long.
All right, so yes, we had a very you can say constructive discussion or a summary here. So it was mostly on which strategies enable transdisciplinary approaches in a project frame. That was turned out to be our focus. And so the first point is the importance of resources, for example, to have social scientists in the team and to have a power balance between different scientific disciplines. And the social scientists, to integrate social scientists and to facilitate this power balance is important because out of experience, sometimes nature scientists are kind of taking over, or say also quantitative sciences. So, and it's very important in transdisciplinary research to have the social scientist mindset integrated, because it's about understanding also motivations of different stakeholders, and really also having this as an integrated focus of the whole approach. And then what is limiting and what can at the same time enable project or transdisciplinary projects is to have sufficient time for collaboration, for meaningful engagement, for these iterative processes, and to really already incorporate that in the project frame and in the planning. And now, of course, we have this challenge of being in having these typical project frames, which are 5 years, for example. So there was a very good idea to have this strategy, to have, for example, 2 5-year projects in a row, and forming these chains of projects which are able to build up networks, to have these negotiation processes, to have a long-term learning process, co-learning process together through this chain of projects. And because transformation needs time, and engagement needs time, and this is also feeding into thinking about that the whole transdisciplinary approach really is based on a process which starts with identifying a problem together, and also, of course, that's already should be a part of writing the proposal for the project, and then but also guiding the process till evaluating it participatory. So to have a time for this, and to really engage and integrate farmers, for example, and other stakeholders. You need good facilitation skills. You need the tools, and I think that's referring to the framework we got presented today. This idea of that we need innovative methodologies, scientific methodologies, which are able to recognize and acknowledge indigenous knowledge and integrate it in a process, not extractive, but really as having farmers as experts integrated, who are actively co-creating solutions and also evaluating them in real life situations. And and that's also about creating a shared agenda, where the stakeholders are actually the drivers of and the ones who are identifying the problem and agenda they want to solve. And then also being clear about the theory of change, which the process is based on, and that gives a good base for reasoning for who to include and also who maybe not to include, because realistically it's not possible to include all stakeholders, but to include the relevant ones, and that really needs to be based on clear communication and this idea of what is our theory of change. And then very important funding schemes, and they need to be adapted to support transdisciplinary approaches. And for example, aiming for long-term instead of aiming for short-term successes. Yes. So how to upscale transdisciplinary approaches? There was this idea that because it's so context specific, it really is about rather upscaling approaches than, for example, specific practices. And one approach could be based on education or on is through farmer-to-farmer sharing, for example. So that means having this this mode of facilitating exchange, for example, that is upscaled. Changing policy is very important to enable upscaling, and that on different levels, starting, for example, on a university level to integrate transdisciplinary approaches. Having a reflection phase integrated, the participatory reflection was one approach which was considered important for upscaling, and the opportunity to include different stakeholders, and then, for example, stakeholders who are not yet engaged with agroecology, or you could say involved in this transformation process, they can be also integrated in this participatory reflection to create also a co-learning with them and inspiring process. So, and then maybe based on that, an upscaling of transdisciplinary approaches and agroecology. And what do you think are the biggest barrier or challenges? That is the question you could say we discussed by already elaborating on constructive strategies to enable transdisciplinary approaches. So the ones which remain as big challenges are how to counteract international lobby, and yeah, so for the limited time, I think we already collected some ideas. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lillian. So I am aware of time. We are past 1 minute, and we still haven't heard back from Francisco. So I would like to ask you, if you can, to stay another 10 minutes. So we hand it over to Francisco. He reports back, and then we wrap up with Michael Hauser, our keynote speech. So Francisco, over to you.
Thank you, Fabio. It's Sandia who
yeah, I
who
ended
did
up. It's okay.
I
So
arrived
I'm
already
happy
late.
because
Waiting for
sorry.
the Spanish one. Okay.
Okay, sorry.
No,
Go
it's
ahead,
fine. No,
Sandia.
all good. It was a lovely facilitating this group. Very briefly, excuse whatever is repeated from earlier comments. So for the first question on reflecting on what was presented and where people thought there was, good examples or what are sort of promising avenues for promoting transdisciplinary work, there was recognition that all the examples and projects had really strong efforts and integrated strategies to adapt to local conditions and bring visibility to many of these principles of transdisciplinarity, but also agroecology. But perhaps, again, something that was already mentioned, maybe also some more focus on this trust building element, and also the need for simplifying complex concepts, which again, others have also mentioned, and the need for that. There was also a lot of reference to sort of how to minimize, sort of based on Lisa's comments and other projects that were shared about not being extractive when it comes to data and looking at how we treat these informants, so to speak. How do you leverage their agency? And in trying to wrestle with this issue of that, when a project is started, if you're the funder or donor, remember that those who are the recipients or beneficiaries or whatever, lingo is often used or misused, they have to live with the impacts and consequences of these projects. And often, what will that entail? And that should inform thinking, so that, as many projects mentioned, these should be longer term processes that are more inclusive. So thinking about what are the ramifications for those on the ground. There was also thinking about what are like tangible practices. So there was a suggestion that while frameworks are great, physically bringing together people of diverse backgrounds is probably going to nudge you, whether you want to or not, to a more holistic process, just because you are physically bringing different minds, backgrounds to the table. We also had a discussion on interdisciplinary versus transdisciplinary, and if there's time, you can stay tuned to let Francisco give that little primer on what's the distinction. On the second question on what are the biggest barriers, there was this thinking on, for example, that there is still a very siloed mentality in research often, that people don't really want to get outside of their comfort zone, even when there are promising but things that are outside what people know or is what is conventional. So, and you know, this is still a major challenge for many. There was also this, that we also got confirmation that this longer style of doing a webinar or dialogue is appreciated and allows for a bit more deep diving. Then we talked about, okay, what are other challenges are that, again, the problems that most of these projects and panelists also discussed and many of our participants are dealing with are complex, and there may be rigidity in terms of the institutional infrastructure that is in play. So if you want to address one problem, it's not just one ministry or one department, and this again can be a challenge in actually implementing change or nudging towards more open approaches. Also fear of failure, which is also something that was mentioned, I think, early on. And again, the example used was the use of agrochemicals. Ultimately, farmers use this because they have a sense of security when using it, not realizing what are the trade-offs, for example. So how do you, that also applies to research, where many people may not be willing to step beyond what is comfortable or what they know or are familiar. Finally, under this section, just again, I think this has been echoed by Lisa and others about Lillian, in terms of needing sort of reliable methodologies for transdisciplinary research and approaches, because ultimately from a science or research perspective, there are those who are going to look towards this and see, okay, how can we validate this? How is this something that can actually be adapted? How do we kind of verify what you're doing? So that kind of scientific rigor, but needing new approaches that are considerate and informed by transdisciplinary thinking. So thinking and methods need to change. Finally, what are the resources and what is the support that people envision? The line that came away from this is the difference that makes the difference. The idea that there isn't a one size fits all. So, you know, try to be innovative, bring something that may be drastically different, because that stimulation itself is likely to, you know, bring more people on board. So there was an example of, for example, a youth hub to try and get people to think more sort of innovatively, more about to spur innovation. Yeah, and it will help reinvent the narrative. What else? Okay. Again, there was a suggestion that maybe we need to also think about how did we get here to this point. So Michael was raising the fact that a lot of the things that we're discussing are not new. They've been around for decades. So what is maybe, how do we need to frame these conversations at what scale? Because the knowledge has been there. You know, how do you integrate different kinds of crops or systems? So why isn't it maybe resonating? What do we need to do to elevate those conversations? Yeah, and then maybe finally, just, you know, there are a lot of what we're talking about are project level, collective level. You know, how do you down the road try to nudge people towards maybe thinking more about their own approach, how their own outlook? So what are individual level interventions or incentives? How do you incentivize this kind of thinking and taking up these kinds of activities to broaden horizon? So again, sorry if I've done a disservice to what people said, but that is what we discussed in brief.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you so much, Sandhya. I'm not sure we should delve into the intricacies or the nuances and differences between interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. So Francisco, you may excuse me if I don't.
I agree completely, Flavio,
okay,
no problem.
Okay. So I'll hand it over to Michael. And I understand there has been so many inputs and so much has been said over the course of these 3 and plus hours. So I don't expect you to wrap it up really, you know, in a consistent way, but maybe some reflections from you, because we started with your keynote speech, which was very interesting. We provided background information to all the participants and registrants based on your framework. And so just some takeaway messages or ideas, and of course, with the idea that we will refine and keep on working based on the many inputs of today. So over to you.
Well, thanks, Fabio, and thanks to everyone. My brain's bursting. It's so many incredible inputs that I have received. So I did learn a lot, and it basically confirms what I said at the beginning of my presentation, that the fact that I'm holding a keynote here is just the result of a couple of random events. I think anyone could have held that keynote, perhaps from a different perspective, and we would still have reached somewhere where we have just reached after these 3 hours. In brief, I mean, what I take home is number one, the strengthening of my own my personal definition of what transdisciplinarity is, and it's in very simple terms, it's a number of people coming together in groups to solve a common research challenge. Yeah, and I'm tempted to compare this with a citizen-led football team. They come together to solve, a challenge. They work together. There's no question about who owns the ball, who owns the data. It's everyone contributes to score. So that's what I picked from it regarding from the conversation regarding the definition. Secondly, on the framework, 1,000 thanks. I think what I've heard and took note of really helped to rethink the framework. I mean, there's plenty of new indicators that now circulate my mind. Of course, the intercultural process of co-creation is an important thing that was mentioned. Learning, transdisciplinarity means learning, and we'd have to have an indicator for that. Team composition was mentioned. The degree of engagement, where do we start? Yeah, at proposal writing. Yeah, as I said, if it's a citizen-led football team, they start together before the ball actually starts rolling. So same here, and so on and so forth. I'm not going through all the indicators, but I also have a question that I can't answer. Now, what if the definition of transdisciplinarity is context specific? Would then also the framework be context specific? And would the indicators change? Would actually the indicators have to be an outcome of a negotiation process with all those people who work together? No, and if that's the case, do we still need minimum standards? There are plenty of debates that we could have to further strengthen that framework. But I also picked, Fabio, is that there's some utility in the framework. So it wasn't just a nice thing that we put forward, but there seems to be utility in it. And I think Lauren mentioned it, and Jane as well, and a couple of others. Right, and the last one was on the barrier. Well, again, I think the biggest barrier is just us. Yeah, it's people, and because we all have our baggage. We have our institutional ties. That's then another form of baggage that we'd have to navigate. I think engaging in transdisciplinary partnerships requires a lot. And one important thing that we haven't mentioned, but I'd like to put forward here, is emotional readiness, because it can be a process full of pleasure, but it can also be tough and tiring. And one would have to be emotionally ready to engage and learn together with all the package that we've come. So it's people. It remains a people issue to me. Fabio, back to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Very wise words. I do want to say that your question is really so interesting, and I would be tempted to answer it immediately, but I won't. But it does indicate the need for further reflection, further occasions like this one, and further interaction with the people that were here today, and maybe those who registered and could not join So on this regard, I would like to excuse myself for with everybody in the room because we weren't able to have a proper Q&A session, and there was also a little poll at the end planned. So what I can do, because I would like to close this meeting, it's been quite long for everybody and tiring. I would like to thank everybody, and I want to reassure you that we will be reaching out to you, sending all the information, the recording of this event, the presentations, and maybe the survey that I was planning to carry on today will be sent remotely, and you can do it at your leisure when you have some time, and we will keep on engaging with you over these themes, and you will get our updates as time goes by. So thanks again.
A round of applause for Fabio and the team.
Oh, thanks. No, a round of applause to everybody. Honestly, presenters, organizers, panelists, it's been amazing. And I think it shows really that this format has value, and we will keep on developing on this. And if you haven't been on the Agroecology TPP website, go have a look there. There is a tool, it's called Request a Workshop, and you can request a specific topic and we will develop it in a workshop for you. So thanks so much for your time, your patience, your inputs, your brains. I wish everybody a great day, a lovely evening or morning, wherever you are in the world. And we'll be back with information.